Welcome to another 808 Summit, and today we have Justin Womack. Justin, how you doing?
Doing well. Thank you for having me on the show or on the summit. Thank you.
Yeah, on the summit. Yeah, you're welcome, Justin. Basically, one of the reasons that you actually got to be on the summit is two reasons actually. We did a podcast together. I hired you to help me with some of the podcast stuff afterwards, and because we had such a good rapport during the podcast, like, hey, want to be on the summit? And you said yes.
That's right, I did.
Yes, this is the guy that if people ask me, how do you get so big and everything, people talk about, how do you get set up? Justin is the one who did a lot of it.
Yeah, and I've been doing that for a lot of my clients recently. I'm also on Fiverr Pro. So for those of you that don't know, Fiverr has kind of broken off into multiple divisions. They have their standard division, which is like what started out as $5 a gig, and now they have a pro division. The pro division, I'm allowed to charge as little as $100, and then as much as I want. I do podcast consulting there for $100 an hour, and I do a lot of it. So it's kept me busy. It's kept me on the top of learning the latest trends and tricks in podcasting. So it keeps me on my toes. So I'm pretty on top of this. Plus I manage multiple shows on a concurrent basis. So not just my own show, which is called Marketing Geeks, but other shows as well.
Sweet. So Justin, I guess we're going to be talking about podcasting then.
That's right. We are.
Now, I have to tease you.
Yes,
because
please.
I told you needed a PowerPoint.
Yes, you did.
Got one, and then you say, you know what? Just give me the video. I'll do it post.
Hey, that's how it's done. That's how it's done in the big leagues, right there. I don't need a PowerPoint right away. I'll do it in post.
Love it, love it. So, Justin, let's start talking. Go for it.
Well, number one, I want to introduce myself.
We have one more important rule. Very important.
Okay.
If you don't give value, Justin, you may not pitch.
Oh no. Okay, I better give a lot of value then.
You better do it.
Awesome. Well, I wanted to introduce myself again for your listeners here on the summit. But my name is Justin Womack. I'm an online marketer. I'm a podcast host or co-host of the show Marketing Geeks, which has hit as high as #1 in the business management and marketing subcategory. So we did hit #1. It lasted for like a split second, but I have a screenshot of it, and that's all that matters. So I got that screenshot. I'm also a featured keynote speaker, and I'm an expert copywriter. So that's a little bit about me. I run a company called JMac Media, which is a online marketing and consulting company where I do both done-for-you services and get going. And now I'm going to get into the podcast stuff because that's what you're here for, right?
That's what we're here for.
That's what we're here for. So let's get into it. So #1 is kind of like, why podcasting, right? Why do you want to get into podcasting when there's so many other mediums out there? Well, #1 is this. I look at podcasting like if I were looking at YouTube in 2006. This is a prime time to get into a market that is growing and exploding. Right now, there are only about a little bit over 1 million podcasts that are active right now. But at the same time, if you want to get on YouTube or you want to start a blog, you're looking at least 500 million YouTube channels and even more blogs that are out there. So the competition, although 1 million is not a small number, in comparison, it's a lot lower. And again, this medium is exploding. It's been around for about 15 years, but advertising has not been available in the capacity that it has and in the optimized fashion that it has. That's only been around for about 2 to 3 years, I would say, that in a high capacity where it's available to everyone now. So for the first time, the everyday Joe is able to monetize a podcast. And I will tell you that with my show, I don't pretend that we are, crushing and making millions and millions on our podcast, but we've launched our show. It's been on for less than a year. And this month alone, we are on pacing to do about $600 in ad revenue this month. And that's been growing steadily every single month since we've launched the show. And I expect to be hitting above $1,000 a month by the end of this year, if not more. The numbers continue to go up. Nothing has been dropping. Everything's been going up on a steady increase. And I see this as an exploding platform. And I think if you think back again, if you've ever looked into influencers like Gary Vee, he started his whole business off of YouTube. Now is the time to get into podcasting because there is a massive opportunity to build a personal brand or a company brand on podcasting.
Absolutely. I want to agree with that there. I want to add to that there. Also for me, for podcasting, it's what made this summit happen because I get you on really quick for the 8 minutes and 8 seconds. And then if I feel that we have a good rapport during that time, say, hey, do you want to be on my summit? And then we go from there.
Well, talking about podcasting on top of that, it's you build a network through podcasting. By having your own podcast show, I get people reach out to me every single week. I probably get 5 to 10 emails a week from either PR agents or people directly emailing me that want to be a guest on the show.
Right.
So if you want to build your network and you want to have a bigger reach in the business professional community, having a podcast positions you to be a person that people want to get to know. And that's big. I mean, for you, Bob, you've only had your podcast running for what, like six to 10 months, in that range?
Since October. So we're about 7 months now.
About 7 months. And if you look at that, how many people have you added to your Rolodex? I'll call it your Rolodex of contacts. How many people have you added since then?
200.
Yes. Hundreds of people. And not just any people. These are like, you're adding people that work for major companies like ClickFunnels and other big brands. These are people of stature. They're not just your everyday Joe Schmo from the street. Is that right?
Right, and I'll tell you right now, I've had multiple people on it. A lot of them that have made on ClickFunnels. Basically, ClickFunnels gives you an award when you've made $1 million through their software. Mm-hmm. So I probably had about 10 to 20, I don't have an exact number, of people who've made $1 million off ClickFunnels. And I've even had about 4 of them that have made $10 million off ClickFunnels. Wow.
So cumulatively, you've had people of a very, very high level, high net worth. And then you also mentioned that you've been at like the reach of all the guests you've had on the show. Like, what kind of a reach can you measure that they would have had?
I don't know about the reach of the show, but I can tell you for the summits, because again, get them on the podcast first. These people have wanted to be on the summit. The reach for this summit is somewhere between 150 to 200,000.
And that's amazing. And the summit, again, is because of the relationships built through the podcast, essentially.
Right. Every single person that is on the summit, except for maybe one, there's one I can probably say there, is all because of the podcast.
Yeah. And that just shows the power of having a podcast to begin with. And whether you have one or you don't have one, there's also, I mean, obviously there's optimization to it. So you need to, one, get the podcast launched, make sure that you're getting it on iTunes. You're able to get it on Stitcher, Spotify, Google Podcasts, iHeartRadio, all these different networks of podcast hosting. But 2, you have to know a little bit about podcast SEO. You have to know a little bit about how to build your audience, strategies and techniques that are working in 2019 to build your listener base. And then there's something about knowing also, if you want to monetize the podcast through advertising, you have to know what the strategies are to connect with advertisers. If you want to monetize the podcast in other ways, what are the other strategies that you can monetize through? And so I have a course out there that teaches these different strategies of monetization. There's 6 major strategies of monetization that I talk about, and we'll get into some of those as we go through this today. But each of those have a very powerful impact on how they can, 1, grow your network, 2, grow your income in business, and just kind of grow your reach in the community as well. And additionally, if we look at podcasting as a medium, if you look at the average listenership, meaning like how long do people listen to podcasts versus other mediums out there? Well, podcasting has one of the largest retention rates in terms of listeners out of any medium out there. If we look at like blogging, it tends to be like an average anywhere from 5 minutes to 10 minutes, maybe 15 minutes if you have a very intriguing article out there that you can grab somebody's attention for. On a YouTube video, the average view is around 3 minutes if it's compelling content. I mean, you're doing a good job if you have 3 minutes, maybe as high as 5 minutes, but it's rare that people will stick around on a YouTube video beyond the 5-minute mark.
Right.
Again, it's you have to very, very compelling content, but with podcasting, the average listenership is about 30 minutes a day. And that's huge because podcasting is one of those few mediums that actually transports very well with you. It's very good on the go. It's very good mobilely. You can listen, whether you're in your commute, you're listening to a podcast in your car, whether you're on a jog, whether you're in the gym. I mean, people listen to podcasts in so many different ways, whether you're cooking at home, whether you're just hanging around the house, grocery shopping, whatever it is. There are ways of bringing podcasts with you on the road that video and blogging doesn't translate in the same way because you need to be looking at a screen for those mediums. Whereas on this, you're just listening. So you just put in your headphones and be on the go. Take the podcast with you, and then you have like your own university in your pocket these days.
Yep. And one other thing I want to add about podcasting is it's easy to go from a podcast, putting it on YouTube and Facebook, than starting on a YouTube and Facebook and making that into a podcast. Because like every single one of my episodes, I just film them on Zoom and boom, just pop the video onto, YouTube.
Yeah.
Use TubeBuddy to make sure I got the right tags done.
Well, it's easier, but it's doable the reverse way too. So if you have a YouTube channel, and you also have to think about this, like your content has to be workable from an audio only standpoint. So if your video channel is doing a lot of show, that might, you're showing things on the screen, that might not translate well to a podcast. But if you have an existing YouTube channel, or you have existing recordings of prior speeches and things like that, we can actually take those and convert them into a podcast. So if you, so I work with people, like I've had a few people recently, actually had a church pastor that recently found me on Fiverr, and he wanted to take some of his old sermons and turn them into a podcast. And so he all he had was the recordings, but we just converted them to the appropriate format. We added in the metadata, which is the data that goes on the back of the file, which is helpful for search on podcasts. And then we launched the show and we uploaded them, and now we're dripping out those on a regular basis, so that he can help to develop his reach further than just his smaller community for the church.
Right.
And so there's ways of repurposing old content and creating a show from it. So that's something to consider. And also back onto the length of show. What's really fun is I have a lot of our listeners that reach out to me on LinkedIn. I think that's it's either email or LinkedIn where people will reach out and either want to be a guest or they'll compliment the show. So I want to give this one a shout out, but I had a guy named Brian McLeod, who is he's a PhD, a JD, so he's a lawyer, and he has an MBA. So all three of those.
It's just a couple things.
Just a couple things. And he's a marketing professor for Francis Marion University in South Carolina. But this is his quote. He said, "I just want to introduce myself. I'm a marketing professor at a small university in South Carolina called Francis Marion University. I recently started listening to podcasts and came across Marketing Geeks. I'm a huge fan. I listened to it all day as I drove from Illinois to South Carolina, about 11 hours. So, so some people treat podcasting like Netflix and they binge listen, apparently.
Right.
So I think he's the longest listener that I've had anyone tell me. But 11 hours of listening to myself and my co-host Andra Sturgeon is pretty incredible. That's a very impressive feat.
That I concur.
Yes.
You'd have to listen to a lot of my episodes to get an 11 hours in.
You would. Yeah, that's right. You have the 808. It's a fair amount of episodes. So, but you're probably getting close to it. I think you've already surpassed it. You have what do you have? Close to 200 now?
Yeah, I'm over 200 now. So.
You're over 200. You've got it. You're there. So, but that'd be almost the entirety to get up to that amount.
Yeah, basically if you think about with the intro and the outro, it's about 10 minutes. Okay,
that adds a little bit to it. That's right. So another thing to consider is every one of these episodes, let's think about audience size too. Because so many, if you're in the coaching industry or you're in the consulting industry, which a lot of my clients are, they're either coaches, they're consultants, or they run information-based businesses where they're selling like a digital course, something like that. A lot of times they will use like the seminar model to get on stages and sell their product and services, and that's a very effective model. But if you think about it, every time you're on a stage for a seminar, the average audience is somewhere in the range of, I'd say 60 to 100 people.
Right.
If you're lucky, you can get a stage with about 300. You don't find very many seminars that are 300 plus. They do exist, but you don't see very many of them these days. And you do find some that are smaller than 60 as well. But with a podcast, I mean, again, I'm going to use my podcast, Marketing Geeks, as an example, which has only been on the air for 10 months. We're up to 2,700 average downloads per episode. Our lifetime downloads is approaching 130,000 lifetime downloads. And again, and we're netting a good source of income just from ads. I mean, a nice little supplemental income that is. But the way that it's building, it's on pace to become a major part of my business within the next 2 to 3 years.
Right.
So, I mean, again, the opportunity, the medium is massive. Just imagine if you have 2,700 average downloads per episode, how many stages is that? That's almost 10 300 person plus stages.
Yeah.
That you're in front of. So it's like you're leveraging this, plus these things live forever. Whereas if you're on a seminar stage, that is a one-day event and you either sell that day or you don't sell.
Right, because no one's going to go look back on a seminar you spoke at, but there's no recording of it.
That's right, yeah.
Yeah. By the way, I just got to say, the graphics that you're putting in so far, I'm very amazed at everything that I'm seeing.
Yeah, I mean, I spend a lot of time on my PowerPoints, so I'm glad that you appreciate it.
Yeah.
Graphics coming soon.
Yeah, there we go. Love it. Make sure you put a mustache on me in post.
Oh, I definitely will. So let's talk about strategy. I want to just give a bit of this. So when we're talking about building a podcast audience, for instance, what are it's like people want to know. Okay, so I'm going to launch my podcast. There's a lot of competition out there. I don't know how to find my audience, and there's a few top strategies here. Obviously, there's something called podcast SEO, which is search engine optimization. That's keyword optimization.
Right.
That I'm not going to have a lot of time to explain the ins and outs of podcast SEO on this show. That's something that you would find in my course. But again, the idea is that you're optimizing all of the text on the back end. That includes the metadata on the files. That includes like the information that goes into iTunes. That includes the episode titles, especially. You should be doing some keyword research. Now, iTunes there's no, as far as I know, there's no keyword optimization sites for iTunes. So what I tend to do is I do Google research and see what people are searching on Google. And I kind of make the assumption that what people search on Google is also relevant to what people are searching on podcasts. And I use that as a means for people to find my episodes, especially, or my show.
Right.
I've been able to get my show ranked very highly. If you're on like your cell phone and you type in the word marketing, my show will come up in the top 10 results. If you type in the word SEO, we come up in the top 10 results. If you grab your mobile phone and search on Apple Podcasts, you will find that.
Okay.
So I figured out some things in the realm of podcast SEO, and it's been working well. So at least we're able, people that want to find, people that are searching are going to be able to find my show. We're positioned in a way to help them.
I have a question for you about that. Is because I download my episodes straight off Zoom, the M4A file. Should I make them MP3 files so I can add the tags and everything?
I use a software called Adobe Audition. And so I export as MP3. The reason that I export as MP3 is one, I like to put in the metadata. You can actually put metadata in an M4A file. It's possible to do that. But two, I've been exploring, and I'm starting a partnership with somebody where we're going to be syndicating our show onto multiple radio stations that require the format to be MP3.
Right.
So I'm getting involved where I'm going to be syndicating the podcast onto actual radio stations, as well as getting it just onto iTunes and the major normal networks. But they require an MP3 format. So I use MP3 to give me the best opportunity to get the show as far as possible, because some people prefer the MP3 format.
Right. Okay.
So that's the reason, and that's something that I'm exploring right now, which I do talk about in my course, but it's still in the early stages of I'm trying to build a way of where I can contract that out and get other people's shows onto the radio. So that will be something that I'll be offering as a service in the very near future.
Nice.
Yeah. And if we talk about, again, building the audience, so that's one is podcast SEO. One of the top strategies of building your audience is actually to go on other people's podcasts. Mm-hmm. And so if you make yourself available to be a guest on other people's podcast shows, I'm gonna give you a stat, and this comes from another podcaster. I know sometimes I'm told that I shouldn't be citing other people's data because it cheapens my own, but I'm going to cite somebody else's data. This comes from Pat Flynn, but he talks about how 28% of his listeners discovered his show from him being a guest on another podcast, and that's a big deal. I mean, if you take that in and think about it, so it's like, okay, so not only should I be doing my podcast, but I should actually be appearing on other shows and promoting my podcast on that other show, giving people a peek into my personality, what they're going to get by being a listener to my show. And that's another top strategy for growing your podcast. So I see that as a valuable thing that I don't see that many people doing. And that's something that even I haven't done a good enough job at yet, but it's something that I need to implement. So I've been doing more and more interviews.
Let me ask you this, Justin. So you go on someone's podcast and you want to send them to your podcast. Do you send them to your website? Like, how do you send them from verbally? How do you send them to your podcast?
So I've actually built a website. So I would build a website for yourself. So that if you, so I have marketinggeekspodcast.com, and that website is going to drive them and give them links to all the different podcasts, all the different ways of the show, and it'll help them to do that. So that's the way that I've done it. And I also, there are podcast networks out there. So there's a client of mine who has a network. It's called evolutionpodcast.com. And I'm listed under his podcast network. And so that's a growing thing that we're working on and building. And so I have my, what do they call it? Like I have mini something and I don't even know. My metaphors suck today, but
Allow it.
I have my feet in many different areas. But it's good to have like a homepage. So you can have all your episodes that are hosted as like a blog on your website. That's one thing. And you can also just kind of have a homepage that is just like it's almost like a landing page, but it has a link to iTunes, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, wherever you're hosted, that which could be like, there's different hosting platforms out there, Libsyn, Podbean, Anchor,
Right.
a lot of these different hosting platforms, depending on what you're interested in. But yeah, you should have an ability for people to listen to your show any way that they want to listen to it. So if you just have that one homepage where they can go to, it makes it as easy as possible. We want to make the process as easy as possible for people. One of the things I've discovered from launching a podcast is one of my clients specifically has a huge seminar business. So he does his so he promotes his show a lot by going on stage. Whenever he's on stage, he'll always promote his show, and he's had anywhere from 100 to 300 people in the room. So I was at one of his events where he had about 300 people in the room. We were promoting his podcast from the stage, and everybody wanted to listen to it. But it was sometimes you forget just how tech challenged a lot of people are.
Right.
So we're like, just go to Apple and download the Apple Podcast app. Or it's already pre-downloaded on your phone, that one. Or go to Google Podcasts, and there were a good third of the people in the room could not figure out how to do it. But by having a website where they could go to and they can either listen through their web browser, which is, people can do that, or they can click a link and it goes directly to iTunes or Google Podcast or these other networks. That simplifies the process. So simplicity is important because not everybody is as tech savvy as me. I'm kind of one of those people that has that curse of knowledge, where I feel like things are so easy for me that I feel like they're as easy as they should be as easy
for everyone else.
People, but they're not. So
yeah, and actually, again, if they want to see a sample of it, like a really bare bones cheap one, they should go to 808podcast.com.
Yeah,
you go to the screen. Literally, it's all it is my basically 8 minutes 8 seconds because 808 looks like Bob. Check out the episodes, and it points to iTunes, YouTube, Google Music, and Facebook. Done.
And that's all that you really need. Yeah, you just want something that points in the direction of where you're going.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, those are some of the big ones there. Plus, every time you bring on, let's talk about another way of promoting your show. It's just your guests in general. So when you're bringing on guests that have a decent sized email list, they have a decent sized reach. The majority of time that you have somebody on your show, they're going to do some promotion. Now, a lot of them probably won't just send an email to their entire list because they're on your show, but they will at least be willing to make a post on social media. And if you pre-frame your conversation or your interview, that's a requirement for that's a pretty low barrier for entry that most people will be able to comply with. That's not a big deal to at least just share a post or put a post out there. And if you want to make it really simple, you can create the copy for them. You send it to them with the image file, and then all they have to do is post it. And that makes it as easy as possible for your guest. And the majority of them will do that. And that gives you, it helps you to borrow some of their audience.
Yeah, then that's what I do is I use ClickFunnels. And so basically every podcast episode has its own funnel that they go in. If they want more episodes, they give me their email address.
And that's the name of the game, is we want to leverage other people's reach.
Right.
So
that's the big thing what podcast is,
Yeah,
Again,
exactly.
Leverage other people's reach to build this summit. I couldn't have done this summit on my own.
And whether you're doing that through your guests on the show or you're doing that by being a guest on other people's show, you're still leveraging other people's networks to build your own audience.
Right. That's the big thing here. Actually, we both have the same coach, Casey Everhart, and he basically says other people's content plus other people's reach equals more money.
That is absolutely correct.
Yeah, that's really what a podcast is. It's other people's content.
Now, I want to say something else. So I had a client also who actually it's the same client that does the seminar. He doesn't run ads on his podcast currently because that's not the monetization strategy that he wants to implement at this time. And he doesn't even make hard pitches on the show. But what happened is he happened to be traveling Europe last year, and in one of the countries that he was in, a listener happened to live in that country and reached out after he put the show out there because that show was going up, a day or two after he actually recorded it. So it was a quick turnaround on recording to posting, and they were able to connect and they were able to actually meet while he was over there. And he ended up closing a $5,000 deal with that person because of the podcast. Yeah. So it's So just creating, and a lot of that is because he was able to build brand authority through the podcast, because this is somebody that's never met this guy. Keep that in mind. He's in a different country. So the only thing that he has going for the gentleman that has this podcast, the only thing that he has to establish himself as a credibility and as authority in his industry is the podcast. And because he has that show, he is deemed as an expert. He's deemed as an authority. So that's the power of podcasting. It creates what I would call, whether you want to call it perceived authority or real authority. I mean, is there really a difference? I don't really think so.
Right. There really isn't.
Really isn't. So whatever you want to call it, it's effective. And because of that, he was able to get into the conversation. Now, he's a great salesperson, so this results are not typical on something like this. You have to have some knowledge on how you can pitch and sell once you get somebody on the phone. But he was able to create phone conversations from it, and he has significantly grown his podcast grown his business through the podcast by leveraging conversations like that. That one was just especially kind of cool because it was in a different country, and I thought that was a pretty cool story.
It was. Yeah, that's cool. And actually, I did the same thing with the podcast for On Fire Reviews, one of the companies I own. I've used the podcast to get multiple people on there.
Yeah. So it's just awesome. Now, kind of going back to listener stats again, I do want to add a few more things here. So 80% of listeners, and this comes from third-party data, which I will have. If you check the PowerPoint slide, I have it referenced right there. The reference to the data.
I see it right there. It's
right there.
Yeah, right there.
But 80% of podcast listeners listen to the entire episode, and it doesn't matter what the length is. As far as this stat says that the length is irrelevant. 45% listen to the majority of an episode, and that means 51% or greater, and 30. Shoot, I'll have to fix this, Bob. Sorry about that.
That's okay.
So let me start over again. So 80% listen to all or most of the episode,
right? And
that breaks down to 45% listening to the majority, 51% or greater, and 35% listening to the entire episode. So all of it, 100%. And then the rest of them will listen for a little bit of time, and even that little bit will tend to be longer than they would listen to a YouTube video or be reading a blog post. So you're still getting a large amount of attention. And if we go back to like a Gary Vaynerchuk, attention is the name of the game. So we're getting their attention and getting them on us. The average podcast listener listens to 7 shows. So you're not just competing for their one slice of attention. The average listener listens to 7 total shows. So that's a good kind of a relief for some people that have to think about that. So again, you don't have to be the sole show that they're going for. If you're in the topic that they're interested in or the niche that they want to follow, the average is that they listen to 7 shows. So there's a good chance that they're going to discover your show and then become a fan and a subscriber along the way.
Right.
In the United States right now, 50% of U.S. homes are podcast fans. Mm-hmm. And 44% of the entire U.S. population has now at least listened to one podcast episode during their lifetime. So that's
40%?
44.
44. Okay.
44%. So that kind of just shows you that it's a medium that is taking hold. And I mean, it's been around for like 14 years. So it just recently is it becoming more of the normal lexicon of the everyday business consumer. So I think more and more it's becoming it's entering our popular culture. I was just invited to speak at a local event here where I'll be talking about how to create a podcast for non-business people, because it's getting to the point where it's not just about business people creating podcasts. Now we have, different niches of just like, there's probably Star Wars podcasts. I'm sure they exist. I'd probably listen to one if I thought about it. Or I know there are movie geek podcasts. And so there's a lot of different areas that might not necessarily reflect direct business interaction, but they can be other fields as well. So 26% of listeners listen at least every month. So they're listening to at least a few shows every month. And then 17% listen every week. And that's a total of 55 million people that are listening to podcasts every single week. But let me give you this one stat, which I think it is the one that matters the most. And that's that.
Oh, there you go. I'm unmuted. Sorry, my mic burped for a second there. Can you hear me now?
I can hear you now.
Yeah. So I want to say this first beforehand, just because it amuses me, is while we're on, I typed in Google podcasts about cats. And there's literally an article that says 10 best cat podcasts for people who love their cats.
There's probably like 1,000 of them too. So, I mean, you think about like YouTube channels for cat lovers. How many of those exist? That's a lot of fun though. And it's funny, but yeah, I mean, you could probably get down to not only just cat lovers, but if you went even deeper, you would probably find like a breed of cat that has a podcast dedicated to it. You probably find things like that. I mean, in 2019, it's all about getting into these deeper sub niches.
Yep.
And you've talked about like blue ocean versus red ocean. So it's like, if you want to find your blue ocean podcast, let's get into like the real deep stuff. Let's talk about cats that are hairless cats.
Yeah, I was just about to say hairless cats. We're on the same wavelength.
Now, the stat though that I wanted to emphasize that I think is the most important here is that 45% of podcast listeners, that these are active, out of the active listeners, 45% of them have an income of over $75,000 annually. So we have an affluent crowd listening to podcasts right now. Mm-hmm. And if you think about that, that alone is a major reason to get in front of this type of an audience. So these are qualified people. I think about the people that have reached out to me on LinkedIn. Several of them have been highly credentialed people. And I gave you an example of somebody that had a PhD, right. A Juris Doctorate, and an MBA. I've had several other people that have had either MBAs or PhDs reach out to me through LinkedIn, or they're marketing directors for companies, or they're CEOs. So these are the people that are listening are pretty high qualified people. Now, granted, I do have a few college students that reach out to me. But who's to say that they won't be $75,000 plus income earners in the near future? Right. So
getting them young.
Getting them young. So I mean, I do have some of them too. But so we have a bit of a mix of audience, but it's a very highly qualified audience that I have found, and then this stat supports that data as well. Also, 27% of the general population. The 27% of the U.S. population that listen to podcasts have a 4-year degree. And kind of what I described there is pretty accurate, on point with that. And also, podcast listeners are more likely to use Netflix. So they like mediums that have less ads, I think, is kind of a fair assessment. And I think it's okay to have 1 or 2 ads, or even 3. But if you're getting into like the other means of YouTube, if you have a free account, you're getting ads that disrupt the middle of your YouTube videos these days. Right. Or if you think about like traditional cable, where you're watching TV show and they have 4 commercial breaks and they're disrupting your entertainment by being in the way a lot. I mean, that's more and more becoming less of the norm, because their tolerance for advertising has dropped. Now, they still have a tolerance for it, but it's dropping. So that's why some clients prefer not to run any ads on podcasts too, because there are other means of monetizing the show.
Well, also another thing is to add on the ads for podcasts is that you can add your personality into it.
Exactly.
So like when I do mine is at the beginning, my intro, welcome to the 808 podcast, powered by website here. And then I talk about the rules and then if I do have a serious sponsor, I'll say after the podcast is over, we have sponsor time. We got 30 seconds. Go. Which adds to the whole. And again, it is an ad, but it doesn't feel intrusive.
Exactly. Well, you're building your personal brand. I mean, some of this is personal branding, because you're establishing a brand by being the host of your podcast, and you're establishing a brand personality, which I would call part of your personal brand.
Yeah.
So all of that, I mean, that's a form of advertising, but that's not an intrusive one. I mean, it's just like you think about influencers on Instagram who are, they're promoting without promoting a lot of times. They might like take a picture of themselves holding a product, and they're being paid to do it, but they're not overtly necessarily. I mean, they might be, but in some cases they're not overtly promoting the product. They just happen to be carrying it in that photo, and in doing so, creating like a subconscious advertisement.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
So different ways of doing it. But again, like let's talk about your podcast. What is it doing for you? Well, I've already said it's building your prestige, credibility, authority. It's making that transition in your business. It's building your personal brand. So what are some tactics that you can also use to leverage your podcast, especially to help to make some money through it? Well, let's think about this. So every time you do a podcast, a lot of times, I mean, how many times have you had like an author on your podcast, Bob? How many times have you had somebody that has a digital course?
Multiple times.
Multiple times. So if they're an author, there's something called Amazon Associates, which is a affiliate program through Amazon, where you can make this is a very minimal profit strategy, but you could put affiliate links in your show notes and send people to Amazon Associates and make a few pennies off of their book.
Right.
You can make some money. Now, if they have a digital course, most business owners will either have an affiliate program that they actually have software that runs it, or they'll have like a deal that they'll work out with you where you'll send people over through a special link and they'll manually track it and they'll give you a cut of the sales that are made. Mm-hmm. So the majority of people are willing to pay a commission if you're driving them sales. And if they're not doing business correctly, because they should.
Right. There has been a shock that some people say, hey, I got a digital course. Do you have an affiliate program? No. Huh. Okay. Just,
Yeah. I mean, you should think about that. If you have a digital course, you should be offering some kind of an affiliate program, especially because digital courses are well leveraged for your time.
Right.
Now, another strategy I've talked about it, I use for my podcast, but it's sponsors and ads. There are several platforms out there that will help you to connect with advertisers or sponsors for your show. Some of the hosting platforms will help to connect you directly, and some of them have built-in advertising programs. So so that's another means of monetizing your show. Yep. You can also promote your business through your own podcast. What a concept. You can use your podcast to sell your own things. And one of the ways that I would recommend doing that above necessarily just overtly selling through your podcast would be to give out like a free gift and then put them into some kind of a marketing funnel. Right. So I would be more of the passive approach. So I'd be like, let's put them through an actual online sales funnel. So let's just get them, go to this website, grab your free gift. Maybe they grab the free gift and you have an upsell right there, or maybe you just do that through the back end on the email campaign that follows. Mm-hmm. But you should have some kind of a marketing funnel where you're getting your audience onto the email list, because that's important. Because let's not forget about this. Your podcast audience is yours, but it's also mostly owned by the third-party companies that are putting on your show. So you don't have the data. You have the stats, but you don't have the data of your audience until you transition them from a listener to a lead by putting them into some kind of a funnel. So we want to be capturing the email addresses of our listeners in any way we can. And even on my show, what we'll do is periodically we'll do like a quarterly webinar. So we will offer we'll promote like this quarter, we're going to be doing an Instagram marketing live webinar. And then I'll send people, and I'll run it through Zoom webinar, and I'll send people to a registration page. They'll have to put in their email address, and I'll be able to capture email addresses for people to attend that. And then that brings me to my next one, which is to have a donation strategy so people can donate to the show. And that could be done through Patreon. Some of the hosting platforms have built-in donation platforms as well. But what we do with that is kind of what you're doing with this, Bob, but we'll do a live webinar. And at the end of that, it'll be available for free while it's live. But if you want the recording, if you donate to the show, you can get the recording. Plus, you can get a backlog of our other recordings as well. Right. So we'll have a means of monetizing the show through donation by saying if you meet our threshold of $4.99 a month, you'll have access during that time as you're a donor to any webinars that we've done in the past. You'll have access to the archive of those. And if you donate up to, I think it's right now we have it at $30 a month. We do one live call a month for 1 hour, and anyone that meets that $30 a month threshold can be on a live Zoom call with myself and my co-host, where we basically do a live Q&A and take your questions on the spot. So, and
I'm doing kind of a model like that, where the VIP program, where I'm doing a one-time fee for us of the $80.8. Because again, 808, I got to keep the 808, montage thing going on. And that gives them access to a bunch of the guests who are giving free gifts to everybody who are in that program.
And that's exactly the same type of monetization strategy, I would say. I agree. Now, the last one I want to discuss is the idea of you have a platform that you can actually trade for value. So I come from the seminar background. I've worked for a lot of seminar clients. And if you've ever heard of like a product launch or, like Jeff Walker's product launch formula,
Right.
that it tends to deal with a lot of joint venture partners. I mean, so does a digital summit. But to incentivize some people to mail to their list and things like that, if you've built your audience enough and you can prove it through data that you have an audience, you have, let's say you get up to 10,000 listeners per episode, or, you have 1 million lifetime listeners on your show, you build up the value of your platform the more that you build the show. And that becomes a thing that you can trade. So if you want somebody to email to if you're doing a product launch and you want a joint venture partner to email their list to help sell your product launch, you could trade time on your podcast for their email blast. You could trade time on your podcast for a spot on their live stage. So there's different, depending on the value of your show and your audience, you can use this as a chip in negotiations.
Yep,
so
absolutely.
There's a lot that goes into this, and I think it's important to consider that it's not just sponsors and ads. I mean,
No, it's not.
I think that, if you think of this on a real base level, that's what people would think is the only way you're really monetizing a show. But there's so much more that goes into it. And again, let's not forget the value of just building your personal brand by having these, by associating yourself with these high caliber names. I mean, you're guilty by association in terms of you're guilty of being a bigger name yourself by interviewing people of high caliber.
Well, let's give an example of two people that are on this summit here. We have Tyler Jorgensen, with Biz Ninja. He wouldn't be on this summit. Tyler's a big deal. He wouldn't be on this summit unless I did the podcast first.
Yeah. And
the same thing with Casey Eberhardt. Because I had the podcast, he's on and he's our MC for it.
And that's awesome. Tyler, you said he works directly for ClickFunnels. I mean, you talk about prestige. I mean,
right. He's on their speaker team.
He's part of the speaker. He's associated with ClickFunnels, though. That's a big deal.
Yeah, it's a big deal. Like when we talked about it, we actually met with ClickFunnels staff to figure out how we're going to run this through here. And none of that would have happened. Because when they fill out the form, how many webinars have you done for this here? 0. And most of the time they would say no, that part here. But hey, this is the first summit we're doing. And they said because of the podcast is why they're doing it. Because they like my show. They think it's hilarious.
Yeah. And that's awesome. I love that. And I think your show's hilarious as well.
Give
yourself a pat on the back, Bob.
What was that?
Give yourself a pat on the back, I said.
I'm doing that right now. See, pat on the back.
Very nice.
Fireworks go off while I'm doing this.
So to kind of get into this a little bit more. So in my digital course, I go through all the different.
Justin, I'm going to interrupt you. You've not asked for permission to pitch yet.
Okay. Well, I'm not pitching yet. I'm just telling you what goes on in that.
Just making sure. I'm just making sure because I gotta give you permission first.
Good. Well, in my course, which does exist, which I may or may not pitch here, I go into all these different strategies of monetization in detail because there's a lot that goes into them. I mean, like if you want to talk about affiliate links, what are the different strategies for actually getting access to them? How do you get affiliate links? How do you build that out? How do you master affiliate marketing? How do you land these bigger names on your podcast? How do you reach out to the people in the beginning? Because they're not going to be reaching out to you in the beginning.
Right.
Eventually they will start reaching out to you, but in the beginning, you're going to be reaching out to them. So how do you reach these people? What's the best strategies? What's worked for me? What hasn't worked? Where are the mistakes being made? And again, how do you connect with sponsors? How do you list, or what's the best strategy for promoting your own business, or like what's an example of an online funnel that you've used that has worked? Or how do you set up a Patreon account, or how do you set up a way for people to donate to the show, and things like that. So those are things that I cover, which again I may or may not talk about later here, depending on how much value I provide.
You're getting close.
Close. That's good. So, but you would agree that this is it is an important platform. There's a lot of value in podcasting. Would you at least agree with that point, Bob?
I 100% agree. Podcasting has changed my business.
It has.
It really, when I first built the podcast, the idea was it was going to bring leads to On Fire reviews. Like that was my first part there, and it worked. It worked really well. All of a sudden, I realized I got this whole unique thing here. A couple people went to me and said, "Why aren't you doing virtual summits?" Well, I wasn't planning on it. Well, you should, because you have this an asininely big network. So now here we are.
And here we are because of the podcast. You're able to use an entirely different strategy that I don't talk about virtual summits in my course. I'm gonna have to add a whole module on that because of you, Bob.
Well, I appreciate that. And again, I'm probably one of the few people that's going from podcast to virtual summit, because most of the people who do virtual summits, their first thing is reach out to all the C and B players.
Yeah,
because the A players are constantly getting asked all the time.
So you might be changing the game here. So this might be the new model for doing virtual summits. You're ahead of the curve.
I might just be, because I don't have to, because again, it's much easier for me to reach out to someone and say, hey, want to be on my podcast? It's 8 minutes and 8 seconds because 808 looks like Bob. Instead of me saying, hey, want to be on my virtual summit?
And to that same point, I can't tell you how many people reach out to me, whether it's email, LinkedIn, Facebook, whatever they're reaching out to me on, that there's so many like bots out there that reach out, and they always ask for something, value first for them. They want me to buy their product before building a relationship. They want me to buy something. There's so much more value in opening up cold relationships by leading with, great to meet you. I've read all about you. By the way, I run this podcast. Here's a sample of a show I've done. I'd love to connect with you. Something like that. There's so much more powerful in an introduction like that than there is in, I run this business. Here's my sales page. Go buy it right now.
Yeah, and again, I get those messages on Facebook all the time. I do such and such, such and such, such and such. Do you know anyone who needs this? I don't even know you.
Yeah,
I'm not going to give you money yet.
So the podcast
says, hey, you should be on my podcast. This is what it is. I'll go check it out.
Exactly. So the podcast is a great way.
I hardly get any no's.
You hardly what?
I hardly get no's when I tell people to reach out for my podcast. Now, yours is a little longer than mine, so I use a different strategy than you.
Yes, you have a very short podcast, which there's really not any disadvantage to having a short podcast. So I think your model is going to work very well for you. I have a longer podcast because of just because of like the format and what we like to do. And it just kind of, for me and my co-host, it allows us to express our personality in the best way. And and I think depending on what works for you, the length doesn't necessarily matter, because that's a question I get all the time, is how long should my podcast be? And I mean, this is the same thing for videos too. I used to get that question because I used to do more video marketing, and it used to be, how long should my videos be? But the answer is always the same. It's how long you're able to communicate and people will be willing to listen to you.
Right.
So how long are people willing to tolerate you and listen? And if people,
I will say this about the short form podcast that I'm doing, is you have to be kind of an ass to do it. I cut people off all the time.
Oh yeah.
And I had one of my clients for On Fire Reviews. She's like, hey, I should try doing what you're doing. And so this is how I do it. So I kind of did a little bit of podcast coaching for her. And she said she couldn't just cut people off. She felt so guilty. Well, I was like, okay, then don't do my style then.
Well, or you can send it to a affiliate program for a personal growth coach that can help her with that, to get over that limiting belief.
Yeah,
That's why you got to build these relationships with personal growth coaches too, Bob. You can be making money off that.
I gotta get a couple of those on there as well.
So if you are a personal growth coach listening to this podcast, be sure to reach out to Bob and show him your program so he can send people over to you.
Absolutely.
That's another example though of monetization, because I mean there's always cross sells. So whether you're making an upsell, a cross sell, whatever it is, there's always opportunities to be monetizing. And you have to keep your eyes open, and they have to think in creative ways that other people are not thinking in sometimes to find those.
Awesome. Yeah, absolutely agree.
Now, where was I going? I had another topic. I lost my track.
Yeah, squirrel. That's how we do things here. All right. That's another thing I love about this summit is we make them all just kind of whatever. Let's just talk. Yeah,
exactly. I do like that. I do like the talk format. That's kind of how we run my show too. Is we don't necessarily have a set anything. We just kind of hit record and go ready, set, go, and there we go. We're off.
Absolutely.
So the other questions that I get all the time are going to be things like, okay, what's the best microphone to use? What's the best equipment to use? So,
Blue Yeti.
Well, the Yeti is definitely an option. You can see on the video that I'm using a Yeti right now. Mm-hmm. I think the Yeti is a great starter mic, and I think there are better mics out there. I can tell you that for sure.
Okay.
But if you're getting started, like if you're a beginner, the Yeti is going to get the job done. So it's a great microphone to begin with. And then I would upgrade to something a little bit more significant. The other starter mic, I mean, the two starter mics that I like are the Yeti or the Rode Podcaster. I think both of those are very effective starter mics. They're both USB-based microphones. As you get more advanced, you're going to get those XLR, which are the more higher end microphones that are going to require additional equipment and things like that. And again, it's really though, like, let's look at where you're at. You don't need to start your podcast with perfect sound. And I think that there's almost a dilemma with that. If you allow yourself to fall into the trap that everything has to be perfect, you're never going to get anything done and you won't get started. And rather than being perfect, I'd rather that you put out imperfect content, but that you keep doing it over and over and over again, because you're going to get better no matter. I mean, if you do this stuff over and over again, you're going to continue to improve. And eventually your stuff will get perfect, because you'll be bringing in revenue from the show. You can use that to upgrade your equipment if you're ready to do that. And then you can continue to just make things better and better. And if you're editing your own shows, you're going to get better at editing. You're going to learn all the different techniques. You're going to learn all the different filters. I mean, for me, a lot of this stuff has been trial and error. I mean, when I started, I didn't know a ton about podcast editing, and I started before I even launched my own show. I was managing somebody else's show for almost a year before I even started my own show.
Right.
So, but learning just like Adobe Audition's a very deep platform, and that's what that's a higher end editing software. I mean, there's other things out there. There's a free software called Audacity. That's a great software that you can record in and do editing on. There's plenty of other softwares out there that can get it done. But I think the top of the line is, if you're running a PC, that is Adobe Audition, and kind of learning the ins and outs of that. That's a whole thing. That's a whole thing in itself. So I've had to kind of go through the fire and come out of it the other end. And then, getting started in this, I had no idea how advertising worked. So with, just to give you like a quick overview, there's something called CPM. So like with, if you were doing, let's say, Google AdWords, there's something called CPC, cost per click, or CPM, which is cost per thousand. Well, with podcasting, it's that same metric. So we're looking at cost per thousand listens. So we're looking for the CPM, and based on how many thousand listens you get, you're going to get a certain amount from your sponsors. So their sponsors will often pay anywhere from $10. When you're getting started, you're going to see like $10 to $30 will be the most common. As your audience grows, those numbers will go up. But I think in the beginning, you'll see a lot of $10 to $30 CPMs. And keep in mind this, that the volume of your episodes can help your CPM dramatically, because the listens count for any episode. So having a short form podcast like you have is actually kind of ideal for advertising, Bob, because if you were to run ads, if somebody binge listened to 20 episodes in a day, that's 20 listens toward a CPM. Yep. So I mean, and that happens in short form. Or if you have two ads on the show, you have one in the front, one in the back, that's 40. So, when you, the shorter form kind of helps. And that's one of the downsides to my format, which is an hour long. We usually have 2 ads in an episode, but that's it. 2 ads in an episode. And then, and after that, you're just listening to the rest of the content. And until you get to the next episode, I'm not making any additional money from your listen. Right. So from an advertising standpoint, that's the disadvantage of it. But I also think that from a brand building standpoint, and from like people getting comfortable with your personality and your expertise, I get a little bit more time to get into topics a little bit deeper. But I also have less guests on, so I don't build my network as deep as you do. So there's each of those different formats, there's pros and cons.
Right, there is that part there. Because again, you look at my format there, my format doesn't talk about my expertise at all.
Yeah.
It's all about the expertise of the guest.
Exactly. But you're building a bigger network faster. Right. And you have the opportunity, if you were to run ads, you'd have the opportunity to hit higher numbers faster. Yes. Because you have a shorter format. So those are the pros to your side. Whereas ours is kind of maybe spending a little bit more time building our personal brand authority. But in that same regard, Bob, even though that you don't talk about your own business at all, you're still building your own prestige by just being the host. It's that perceived expertise that comes just by being associated with the people on your show. Mm-hmm. So, and again, you're building yourself as an influencer. You're building yourself as an expert just by being the host of the show, which is something that I think is overlooked by so many people that think in short term. Podcasting is a long-term play that can get short-term results, but it's a long-term business building tool. So if you play the long game, I think you need to have a podcast these days.
Right. So, yeah. So basically, if your strategy isn't right now, I need to make money now, get a podcast.
Yeah. Because again, I mean, I've been doing this for 10 months and we're at the point where we're about at $600 a month in ad revenue. Now that's not, that's not getting the job done for a business.
Right. Because you're splitting out, even then you're splitting out with a partner.
I'm splitting in half. Now, but if you think about it though, I mean, in 2-3 years, I mean, this stuff lives forever. So this is like a residual income that I'm building. Number one, it's a real residual income that's actually already there. Mm-hmm. And it's going to live forever. And again, people are going to be able to discover me from this for years and years to come. So if I, in doing my due diligence and continuing to put out an episode a week or more, which we've done for the last 10 months, at least one episode a week, who knows where the ceiling is with this thing. You look at somebody like Rachel Hollis, she's growing in fame right now. She wrote the book, Girl, Wash Your Face, and Girl, Stop Apologizing. And she was on the traffic and conversion stage this year, but she basically said that her podcast is on pace to be doing millions of dollars this year in 2019. And she built her audience the old fashioned way through just grinding content.
Yeah.
And it was like, I think she said it was 7 to 10 years that she's just been doing, like, put her head down and been blogging. And then she started the podcast and doing podcast episodes and interviews. And it's taken her a long time. But if you can, was that 7 to 10, I forget if it was 7 or 10 years, but was it worth it if you're doing $1 million just from your podcast alone this year? I would say yes. The answer is yes. And she's also putting out.
That is the correct answer.
She's also putting out her second New York Times bestseller from organic marketing, which is a rare feat. To get a New York Times bestseller just from organic reach is incredible. And she's accomplished that through both blogging and podcasting alone. So, it's kind of the Gary Vee model too. But it's content wins these days. And again, if you can position yourself as an expert that provides value through content, whether you're doing that as a blogger, whether you're doing that as a podcaster, whether you're doing that as a video expert, all of those can work. I'm here to talk about podcasting because that's what I've found the most success with. But any of those can work. It just happens that podcasting is the one that I've chosen to follow.
And I agree with you. I think podcasting, out of all the current ones, how to build a reach, I think podcast is the best method right now. So like literally, if I had someone who's complete, like out of college noob, no social reach, zero, nothing. And they say, what's the one thing I should do for my business? I'd say get a podcast.
I would agree.
Okay, in that, but again, someone will say, well, no, they should also do this, this, and this. I said, the question is, what's the one thing they should do? And I think get a podcast is the number one thing. And
I agree. And again, you're thinking long-term. And think about this. I mean, this is a side benefit. Like, how much are you learning just from having these guests on your show? I mean, I had a guest on a few episodes ago that talked about cold email, and I learned a ton about the way that he's bypassing like the Google filters and like Gmail filters, which are difficult to get through these days. They keep getting harder and harder. And I learned a ton from him, from interviewing him. And I'm asking him questions that that if I was paying him, if I was his client, I would ask him the same questions, and I'm able to do that for free. And I'm able to borrow his reach at the same time because he was just on my show. So, I mean, I'm also learning myself. I mean, I think of myself as a perpetual learning, a lifelong learner. And so there's also that side benefit of having your own podcast is you not only get to have these amazing people on your show, but you get to ask them anything you want.
Yep, that's true. So, and then for me, again, I do this stupid thing where I ask people, Brussels sprouts or pancakes, just because it amuses me.
Hey, anything you want, like I said, Bob.
Yes. Okay, I gotta tell you a funny story about that. I had Spencer Meacham, who's a big affiliate marketer in ClickFunnels.
Okay.
And like everyone's excited. I mean, this guy's made $1 million in affiliate marketing last year. And so everyone's like, oh, you're gonna ask some serious questions. And I ask him, what is proper men's restroom etiquette? Which are like, you had him on it. You asked them, like, yeah.
I haven't heard that one. So what did he say?
Basically, he talked about making sure wipe the seat. Put the if you're going to pee, put the seat up. And he's from California, and California has issues with public restrooms on the beaches and everything. So he just went on a rant about it.
Oh, I thought he was going to say you got to do the one stall rule too. So you have to be at least one stall away from the next person over if you can.
He never mentioned that at all.
That's my piece of advice. If you can, I mean, obviously there's sometimes you can't. It's just too crowded.
Right. Yeah. If there's 4 stalls and you do the one right next to the person, make eye contact. That's
awkward. Yeah, it could be a little awkward at times. And then again, you can also you'll get their attention. If you want their attention, you can either yell, "Notice me," or you can do that.
Yeah, that whole thing there. So, yep, absolutely. That was an amusing time.
Hey, it's all about attention, like I said.
It is. So, Justin, I think we've been doing an hour-ish. content. I didn't keep track of the time there. I think you've done some really awesome things here. I officially give you permission to pitch.
All right. Thank you, Bob. I appreciate it.
You're
So
welcome.
if you've resonated with kind of what I've been talking about here for the last hour or so, and you want to do this journey with me now, whether you have a podcast or not, what I'm about to talk about can work for you, because not only do I talk about launching your show and choosing equipment, choosing your hosting platform, helping to get the cover art done, how to get your what I call audio bumpers, which are your intro music and your outro music, how to get that done. Not only do I cover all that in the course, but I also get into the post. After your show is live, how do you market the show? How do you grow your audience? What are the strategies? How do you reach out to potential guests? And how do you do it effectively? So how do you do it in a way that is able to communicate with them that your show is worth their time, things like that. So I cover all that in the course. And so again, this is for people that are either are brand new to podcasting, they've never done any of this, they want to learn how to do it from scratch, or you have a show out there, but you want to get better at attracting higher caliber guests. You want to get better at figuring out other monetization strategies for making this podcast make money now, or you want to figure out how to connect with advertisers and you haven't been able to do that up to this point. I can help you do all three of those things, and we go deep into each of those with the course. So with this course, it's broken down into 5 modules. So module 1 is the podcast launch. So again, in the first module of the course, I'm gonna go into everything that is involved with a podcast launch, and it's a lot simpler than you think. Yep. So if you don't have a podcast launch, most people are kind of overwhelmed by this, and they think it's they make it into a bigger thing than it is. And I mean, and granted, I've been doing this so long that again, I have that curse of knowledge, so I think everything's easy. But really, we can get your podcast launched pretty fast. Now, Bob, remember when we got yours officially launched on iTunes? Like, how long did that take us?
An hour.
About an hour. So it doesn't take that long. I mean, you need to have a few things in place. Like you're going to need to have cover art. You're going to need to have podcast audio bumpers. You're going to have a couple episodes in the can that are actually edited and ready to be put out there.
Right.
You need to have like a show title and all that. But I'm going to help you with all that, and including things like if you're really, really starting from scratch, like how do I come up with the idea for the show? How do I choose an appropriate format? Should I be doing interview format? Should I be doing a content, like teaching content format? And how long should the show be? Should I be doing a 10-minute podcast or an 808 podcast like Bob, 10 minutes? Or should I be doing one like Marketing Geeks, which is a full hour? Well, I'm going to talk about that. And the answer always depends on you and your personality and your comfort level with things and how you're able to provide the most value for your audience. So we talk about all that in the first module. In the second module, we talk about monetization strategies. And this one is more of a general, this is more general in monetization, where I just kind of go through the different monetization strategies and we touch on the surface of it. We don't necessarily go deep into each of these because I have other modules that actually go a little bit deeper on some. So module 2 is going to hit on the different monetization strategies on how you can take your podcast and monetize it. Module 3 is going to go really, really deep into sponsors and advertisers, and that's okay. So how do I connect with sponsors and advertisers? What are the different ways of doing that? Because there are multiple ways. There are services that will connect you automatically, which I'll introduce you to. There are services where you can list your podcast and people can find you. And then there are also services where you have to reach out directly, you can actually reach out directly to advertisers. And you could pitch them directly, and you could pitch them in ways other than the CPM format I talked about earlier. You can actually pitch companies on private contracts.
Right. So
this is not a client of mine, but somebody. A good example is I know somebody that pitched a major bank on a $10,000 a month deal and landed it, where they are getting $10,000 a month from a very major bank in the United States, who is the sole sponsor of the show, and who has a few extra bonuses that go along with that. Like they're able to bring certain executives on the show if they want to. They're able to suggest guests for the show. They're able to suggest topics for the show, things like that. But he's getting $10,000 a month, and he landed that through a private gig. So I talk a little bit about how you can reach out to those clients and do that. And that obviously, there's some salesmanship involved to land that, but I can talk about how those conversations can get started and getting your foot in the door and kind of the strategies that you can employ to do that. Which again that's not for starters, but but that's something that actually does work. And that also might be something that you bring in after you've been doing the show for a while, because some of these people will want to see actual metrics that prove that you're going to reach a certain audience before they're willing to invest at that level.
Right.
Okay, so then module 4 is where I go into ways of building your audience. So this is after you've launched the show. And we talked about a few. We talked about getting on other people's shows. So I talk about how you can reach out to other people, how you can find other shows that kind of fit. Because again, you don't want to just go on everybody's show. You want to go on you want to attract people that are going to be your ideal clients too, right? You don't want to just attract everybody. I mean, it's not a terrible thing to attract everybody here, because it's, the right people will always land on your show. But I'd rather go for a more specific audience, because I'm going to get better results from that. So it's like, okay, how do I find these shows? How do I connect with the people in charge? How do I do the research? How do I get on? How do I get as much value as I can? And so I go into that. And I lost my notes. And then the last one that we talk about is how also can I create a program around my show where I can monetize this on the back end, either through donations or through a online funnel. So actually, I kind of lump that into one module, but we talk about like, how do I build a funnel that's going to bring these people onto my email list? Because again, the data is not owned by you until they get on your email list. So I go deep into, okay, how am I going to create something that's going to attract these people in a way that I can get them on my email list so that I own the data? Because data is the name of the game in marketing, and we want to have that email list built through and through. So I go through all that into that last module there, and then throughout there's a ton of other content that is included within these modules. Now, Bob, though, as because that we're doing the summit here, and because you asked me to do you a favor, as long as I
didn't ask you, I demanded.
Well, first of all, I had to qualify, so I'm glad that I did qualify.
Yeah, you did qualify. You're allowed to
qualify. I also need you to do a favor. So since you made that demand of me, which was pretty awesome. I also, if anyone does take me up on this course, they're also going to get a private 30-minute session with me. And so they're going to get 30 minutes private one-on-one call with me directly. And that can be either on a podcast launch, depending on where you're at, or on whatever you want it to be on. It's really an open call, coaching call for you, depending on where you're at in your podcasting journey. So if your show's already launched, we're going to talk about growing your podcast or advertising or wherever your focus is at. If your show's not launched, we'll talk about different hosting companies. We'll talk about microphones. We'll talk about the best cover art. I mean, whatever you want to talk about, we can talk about on that call. So you get that as a special bonus. Now this is a new digital course that I've launched, and I'm listing it for $997. And for listeners of the 808 Summit, you can get this podcasting course today for $297.
Wonderful. Because I was waiting for you to say $497. I was going to say less. I'll keep you at $297. I'll allow it.
Okay, you'll allow $297. I'm glad. Appreciate
I'll allow
that.
$297.
Now you have an option too, though, where people can buy the recordings of these calls at the end.
Basically the idea being is you can watch them for 24 hours after they come up, or they can buy the recordings. And so some people are given bonuses. Are you giving a bonus?
Okay, so if somebody buys the recordings on top of buying my course, I will, instead of a 30-minute call, we'll make that a 60-minute call.
Okay.
So you'll get a 60-minute call with me. You'll get 1 hour of my private one-on-one time. We'll do that over Zoom. So we'll do a private Zoom call where you can ask me anything. I've been doing this a long time now. I know all about podcasting. You could buy this on Fiverr, where I sell it for $100. You're basically getting a $100 bonus. So that's what I'm offering right now. I'm not going to inflate the numbers, because you can go on Fiverr and you can hire me there for an hour for $100, and a lot of people do. So you have the choice. You could do that, or you can buy the course, get the course, and get that call as a special bonus.
Love it. Love it, Justin. You did a great job of going through the course and everything. I am happy. And guys, seriously, what the 808 podcast wouldn't happen if it wasn't for Justin. So if you think this summit wouldn't happen, if you want to really go back and go there, this entire summit wouldn't happen if it wasn't for Justin.
I'm getting a little weepy. Bob.
I want you to add on post. I want you to add tears coming out of your eyes right now.
Yeah, I'll put in a filter and get some gushers. There could be some real gushers coming down.
Love it. Love it there. So and the link's on the screen, right?
Links on the screen. And also be sure to go to marketinggeekspodcast.com to listen to Marketing Geeks.
Check out Marketing Geeks. Love that podcast as well there. So sweet. Justin, I think we're complete.
Awesome, Bob. Well, this has been a pleasure.
It has
always
been.
A pleasure doing business with you, Bob.
Of course it's a pleasure to do business with me because I'm Bob Clark, damn it.
That's right.
That's right there. So guys, again, make sure you check out some more episodes of the summit. We are doing some really awesome things. We've got some great speakers lined up. And everyone else, you guys have a wonderful day.